Hey everyone, welcome to Rise Above It, where we talk about entrepreneurship, sobriety, fitness, even hi-fi, aka all things that raise vibrations. Today we have Sarah Rusbatch, author of Beyond Booze: How to Create a Life You Love, alcohol-free, consultant, speaker, etc., etc. Lots of good stuff. The book came out just February, I believe. So we'll talk about that, the origin story. We always love talking about where people came from too, not just what you're doing now, because past is prologue. We can kind of apply that to our own lives, even if what we're doing at the same moment is not always the same. So let's talk origin stories. You are in Perth, Western Australia. My cousin's husband's actually from there. And then another friend is from there, but you are not originally. You're from UK, Yorkshire? Whereabouts?
From Manchester in the
Manchester. Okay,
UK.
okay.
So I moved to Perth in 2010.
Okay. Oh, what drew you there? Was it work, family?
So my husband is from New Zealand, and he and I met when we were backpacking around the world.
Oh,
And
nice.
I brought him back to the UK with me, and we lived there for many years. And we got married, and we had a baby. And then we looked around London, and it was like meant to be summer. It was bucketing down with rain. The traffic was horrendous, and we kind of went, yeah, maybe it's time to move somewhere hot and sunny and have more of that outdoor lifestyle now that we're starting a family. So we made the decision to move to sunny Perth. And yeah, it's been quite the ride. It's, nothing quite prepares you for how it will be to up sticks and move to the other side of the
Yeah.
world, and that's, I'm sure we'll come on to that. That was probably a big part of where things started to unravel a bit for me. But
Yeah.
on the whole, looking back, it's been a great move for our family.
Okay, good. And it's more of like outdoorsy lifestyle too. That was part of what drew you. Do you do a lot of like hiking, biking, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we've got a boat. My husband's a mad keen fisherman, so he's a water skier. We live right by the river. I am a runner. I'm training for my first marathon. We do a lot of hiking. We do a lot of camping. So yeah, we love the outdoor life.
Well, fun. When's the marathon? Because you said earlier that it's winter there. So what is that? Does that interfere with your running at all, or just what's your training like?
Oh, well, in actual fact, it's the my running is way, way better at the moment because in summer here it gets up to about 40, which would be about 110, 115, like
Uh-huh.
your
Yep.
and so you have to either go running at half 4 or 5 in the morning, or you just can't run. And the problem with Perth in summer is it's super windy. So
Oh,
you're running and it's so hot and it's so windy, and that is just not nice. Whereas at
oh,
the
geez.
moment it's cooler and it's also like still as. And so I went for a beautiful 10K yesterday. There was not a breath of wind. It was the perfect temperature. So my running's going really well at the
Well,
moment. And the
that's good.
marathon, it's the 6th of October.
Okay, all right. So weather should be not super hot yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice and cool. All right. Yeah, I did my first 5K a couple weeks back. That after 15 years of not running, just you're raising kids, you're working, you're trying to launch a startup, all that kind of stuff, and life gets in the way and all that fun stuff. And so I did it. It was great. And then the day after, I went for a Mother's Day hike and broke my ankle. Isn't it funny how that works out?
Oh
So there's a little bit of a hiccup in the workout routine, but I'm getting back in the gym next couple of days here. So yeah, kind of ironic, but completed the 5K. It was fun, and then hopefully more from there. But we'll jump into you. Going back into your kind of your origin story in the bio. You had a short break from booze in 2017. What kind of prompted that, or how were you able to do that? I guess a lot of people might be listening, thinking that they might also be in kind of this gray area that you've talked about. Were you not far enough along that you could go cold turkey? Or like what, tell us about the break. Like what prompted that?
yeah. So by the time it got to 2017, there had been like a few kind of pivotal parts in my story that probably got me to that point. So growing up, I'd always been a big drinker.
Mhm.
Growing up in the north of England, we started drinking at 14. It was
Yep.
kind of, that was what you did. And I had a big capacity for alcohol. So whereas other people might be like falling down drunk after, however many drinks, I was like, I am just getting started. Like I
Yep.
am, I really I thought it was a badge of honor to be able to drink in the way that I could. But back then I was moved to London, all the rest of it. But I was drinking socially. It wasn't
Yeah.
problematic. Like, yes, people would have said Sarah's a big drinker. Sarah, you know, is always the one that doesn't want the party to end. She's always the one when people are talking about going home. I'm like, let's go to another bar. Let's go
Yeah.
to another party. So that was always my story. And for me, it changed once we had made the decision. We moved to Australia. We had 2 children in very quick succession. And I had had a very successful corporate career in London, which I got a lot of self-worth and fulfillment from. And then all of a sudden, I was on the other side of the world with no family support, with 2 kids under 2. I wasn't working. I was going, basically, my days were spent pureeing carrot, changing nappies, occasionally going to monkey music, trying to make new friends, feeling really homesick, feeling really confused, because on paper I had everything that I thought I wanted. We lived by the beach. It was sunny all the time. I had 2 beautiful, healthy children. I didn't have to work because we'd saved enough money in London that I could have some time off with the kids. So on paper, everything was perfect. But inside me, I felt really, really off. Nothing. I don't think anything really prepares you for becoming a mum and going from, particularly if you've had a very big corporate career, to suddenly not having, you know, that sense of achievement and fulfillment that you get every day through the workspace and being at home, and then throw in homesickness, being on the other side of the world, not really having any family support or friends. And that was when alcohol became a crutch. So it became a friend. It became something that I was looking forward to more and more. It was very subtle. It wasn't like, you know, one day I woke up and I was drinking 3 bottles of wine a night. It was just a very gradual emotional dependence. And I say that because at no point was I physically dependent on alcohol. At no point was I drinking. I would rarely drink every day. I wasn't drinking in the morning. I wasn't waking up with the shakes, needing to have a drink. Like, that was not my story. But I was emotionally reliant on it. It was the thing I turned to whenever there was adversity in my life, whenever I was sad, when I was stressed, when I was lonely, if I'd had an argument with my husband, like, fill in the blank. And the solution for me was have a drink. And that worked really well for me for a short period of time, because that's the thing about alcohol. It's great at numbing your emotions. It's great at relaxing you in the short term. The problem is, in the long term, it's utterly awful and really not a great long-term solution. So for me, the impact of that long term started to show itself. 2016, I had my 40th, and it was almost quite quickly after that the wheels started to come off in terms of how alcohol was affecting me. And I know this is a lot to do with women, particularly our hormone changes that start happening, the fact that we cannot metabolize alcohol in our 40s like we can in our 20s because of the changes in our liver, like all of these things. So I started noticing every time I drank, I was waking at 3 a.m. I couldn't get back to sleep. I was tossing and turning. I would say to myself, oh, you know, I'm not drinking this week. I'm having a clean week. That's ridiculous. I'm going to have kale smoothies every day. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to meditate every night. I am not drinking this week. And I'd maybe stick to that for 2 days. And then by Wednesday, there would, you know, I'd be feeling good again. And then I would have a drink, which is bonkers, really, because you get to the point where you start feeling good, and then you do the thing that makes you feel crap, and you just stay in this vicious cycle. And I was starting to notice I was getting more anxious. I was starting to feel concerned more and more. I was overthinking things. I even went to my doctor and I said, my anxiety is through the roof. I've never experienced anything like this. And at no point did she ask me, how much are you drinking? She simply just said, here's a script from some anti-anxiety meds. And I know I should never have taken them, you know, with alcohol. Something in me said, you don't need the drugs, Sarah. You need to make a change in your life. And then there was a couple of incidents where I'd gone too far with the drinking. I'd been at a party, I fell over, I landed on my face, I cut my nose and my lip. And then I woke up the next day. My daughter was 5, and I woke up the next morning and she was standing by my bed, and she said, Mummy, what happened to your face? And just the shame and the self-loathing and the self-disgust that I felt in that moment. And that was when I made the decision to take that break from alcohol in 2017, and I took 3 months off.
Okay. Yeah, it's easier to be self-destructive when it's just yourself, but then you've got that other accountability, and that was kind of like that wake-up call. And it's ironic that women in particular have these kind of like negative and deleterious effects after 40, when that's kind of the peak of what you're talking about with the gray area drinking and societal, and that you deserve a break kind of a thing. And so we're often conditioned for that too. So yeah, that's it's a tougher paradigm too, because obviously it's there's that escapism and whatnot, and you're kind of filling that void. But you kind of had that, you're primed to some extent growing up in the UK too. So like, where one person might have a stress that could drive them toward one thing, you already had, I guess, a familiarity with alcohol. Have you, in your research and talking to other people too, you know, is it always, if you have the upbringing around alcohol, you're easy to go back to that too? Or is it also just societal as well? Like what pushes one toward alcohol and not drugs? Have you
Yeah.
kind of dived into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's both of what you've talked about. So number one, I can remember being a little girl and watching my mum and dad had this massive argument, and I watched my dad go straight to the drinks cabinet and pour himself a whiskey.
Mhm.
And monkey see, monkey do. And so as a kid, you create that neural pathway. It's in your subconscious brain. You're not even aware of it. That is just like, oh, as a grown-up, when you feel a bit crap, you go and have a drink, and that makes it better,
Yep.
right? So you've got that going on. You've also got a generation of women, I'm 48. There's a lot of women my age who grew up in that era of the late 90s, the early 2000s, where it was women can have it all. Women can, girl power, the Spice Girls, Sex and the City. There was this real kind of movement of women not needing to rely on men. They were making their own money. They could do their own thing. And alcohol was in as part of that, as a kind of like, yeah, we can drink men under the table. We can match the boys pint for pint down the pub. There was this real feeling around that. And there was a big movement towards women drinking at that point. This was also the time that the big alcohol industry started to segment their marketing, because they were like, we're not making enough money from women. How can we get more money from the female population? And they did two things. They introduced alcopops because they realized that women didn't often like to drink beer and didn't like the taste of it, and sometimes didn't like wine. So they created these fizzy drinks that were alcoholic but had a very sweet, palatable taste, so that they could get young girls drinking earlier. And then as time went on, there's been a big movement towards mummy wine culture, and the fact that mum needs wine as a parent. And so you've got this shift in the marketing of alcohol. You've got the subconscious beliefs that alcohol is the solution. You've got women who've got a big capacity for alcohol because they've drank through their 20s and 30s. And in Australia, the only demographic where alcohol use is going up and not down is middle-aged women.
Mhm.
So that says a lot about, it worked. What big alcohol have done has worked.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
we now have this entire culture of the marketing and the advertising of alcohol aimed at women as a form of self-care, as a way to relax, because they've identified women are stressed, women are overwhelmed, women post-COVID, and everything else. And they've come in and gone, this is what you need. You look at all the Mother's Day adverts, you look at, everything that's out there that is targeted at women, normalizing alcohol use as a form of self-care. And when you've got a stressed, overwhelmed, anxious woman, and she gets a drink of alcohol, and in the short term, it does relax you, and you go, you then create this emotional dependence on it.
But then it affects your REM, and then that increases the anxiety, or at least doesn't alleviate it, right? And it's funny you
Totally.
mentioned marketing. Some people who are listening might think of how Edward Bernays gave suffragettes cigarettes to associate that with freedom. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing, only 80 years later. And you may have seen this too on LinkedIn a few weeks back. Someone was talking about how the cosmopolitan drink itself wasn't even that popular until it got associated with Sex and the City
Yeah.
on HBO. HBO,
Yeah.
sorry. And yeah, and there's the marketing right there. And I'm sure that show in particular had a lot to do with it, because that's right around what, 98, 99. And you in your book had talked about how the gray area drinking, Gen X women in particular, has gone up upwards of like 80% in the last 30 years since this mid 90s, right?
Yeah.
So just around just before Sex and the City, but I guess it was just a lot of things in particular. It wasn't like one big thing, right? It was just all of it kind of coalescing, as far as you know, right? It wasn't as far as you know, one, Edward Bernays' grandson kind of a thing, right?
So I think that there were, like, I've listened to a couple of podcasts that talk about the specific kind of dates in that kind of mid-late 90s. I can remember I was at university at the time, and I can remember this drink had come out called Castaway, and it was an alcoholic like cocktail, but it just tasted like orange juice.
Uh-huh.
And that was the first drink of its type that we had where I was in the north of England. And we just devoured it because
Oh
it
yeah, it's
was,
dangerous.
you
Yeah.
know, it was and that was like, that was 1997. So it was around that time that that really started happening. And then we also know that that was when the alcohol industry had kind of had that big discussion around, we're not making enough money from women. How can we start to increase our sales?
Yeah, yeah. I did study abroad in the UK in 2006, so it's been a few years. And I remember one drink in particular that a lot of the girls in my class really liked. It was called Snake Bite in London, and I think it was, I don't remember what it was. I didn't have it, but it was dangerous. Like it was really really strong, but it didn't taste like it. And
Yeah.
I always remember the stories, the day after, and everyone was feeling terrible, and just, you didn't at the time. It was one of those kind of drinks. So we're talking about the UK and your upbringing, but now you're in Australia, and you've done consultancy and you've done lots of speaking engagements. How would you compare Australia and US, UK, and possibly even Europe too, as far as this drinking culture? Do you think it seems sometimes to the outside observer that maybe Europe it's more pervasive, but is alcoholism as bad, or are we just on the outside? Is it bad everywhere? Like, because if you're growing up in Europe, you're legally allowed to drink up to 5 years earlier than the US. Like, so sometimes people think Americans are denied it, and all of a sudden they're thrown into it, and they're more likely to be binge drinkers. Do you think it's actually there's parity across the societies then, actually more than we realize?
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting. I would put the UK, Australia, and America in one category, and I'd put Europe in another,
Okay.
because the Europeans have a very, very different approach to alcohol. So, and my grandma lived in France for many, many years, and we would go, and they have these long lunches where the whole family would sit down together, and even the teenagers would be having a glass of wine with lunch, but that glass of wine, you would never have more than two, and that would be
Hmm.
over 2 hours, and it was something to enjoy with your food. So the mentality that these teenagers are getting from a very young age is, you drink alcohol over a long period of time to enjoy the glass of wine with the beautiful meal that you're having and the conversation with your family, and it is this long drawn out period of connection. Whereas in the UK, I used to fill up soda stream bottles with tequila, Bacardi, Cinzano, vodka, whatever you could find. You'd go down the local park, you'd drink it as fast as you could, you'd vomit in a bush, you'd go home and you'd do it again the next
Yeah.
weekend. Like the difference of the introduction of alcohol is very, very different. And so as a result of that, this is not to say that Europe does not have people with alcohol dependency, because it absolutely does, but there is less of a binge drinking mentality. Whereas the UK, Australia, America, there is more of this drinking to get drunk. That is what's role modeled by the previous generation. That is what is societally expected. And that's what people start to do. So there's never that process of, I just have one glass of wine with a beautiful long meal with my family to talk and connect, where the purpose is not to get drunk. That just doesn't happen. It was interesting. There was a study in 2021 that said Australia is the biggest binge drinking country in the world, followed closely by the US and the UK.
It's funny because you can't, say it's just the Mediterranean and wine versus beer, because then you go up north into Czech Republic and Germany, then you get more into beer too. So it's not one a drink or anything. It's you cross the English Channel, all of a sudden you have a difference. Have you encountered anything in your research as to why or when that would have been?
So Yeah, so the British, I think it's really interesting. So they used to have pubs, which was where people went to drink, and
Mhm.
they were only open for certain times. So because it would be open at lunchtime from like 12 till 2, and then it would be open in the evening from like, I don't know, 5 till 11 or whatever. And this, they think that because the pubs used to be open all night, and then they put in these closing hours. And that is when they've recognized that there was more of this binge drinking mentality of, oh, I've got
Okay.
to get my drinks in
Yeah,
before
before
the
closing.
pub closes. So then we started, and with this is going back, a really, really long time, because the focus became, how can I get my alcoholic drinks in to that window before the pub shuts?
Okay. And you've got more of the, the open air courtyards and, town centers and stuff like that in mainland Europe, whereas like you've got your midday breaks or even siestas and whatnot, where it's more conducive to like leisurely drinking then. Do you see this, has this changed at all? Do you still have kind of the, I mean, you're not in the UK, but from what you've read and learned, do we still have kind of this closure and rush, or I mean, pubs are open longer now, right? Like, can this slowly begin to reset, do you think?
No, I
No,
don't
no.
think it that I look, I think there is a massive movement in the UK towards alcohol free. And the last time I was home at Christmas, I was so surprised to see the normalization of alcohol free drinks. So any pub you go into, they will have alcohol free gin, alcohol free beer, and they would have great alcohol free options. And it wasn't surprising for people to order that. So Heineken Zero, which is the alcohol-free Heineken beer, is the fastest selling tap beer in the UK.
Okay.
And which just goes to show how much of a need they've brought out Guinness Zero, which is
Yep.
incredible. Like, so all of these big brands, and it's really taken off in the UK now. There is still a huge binge drinking mentality over there. But it was encouraging to see that there is a normalization of having alcohol-free drinks. That is definitely slower in Australia. We don't, I obviously haven't drank for 5 years. And sometimes if I'm going out with friends, I might want to have an alcohol-free drink. I don't want to have a really sugary cocktail, mocktail type thing. I don't want to have a Coke. I don't want to just have water. But that's kind of my options. Like that
Yeah.
is, it's slower over here.
It has been getting a lot better here from what I've seen, and I'm sure you've heard that too. In that, dry January here, Athletic Brewery was the top selling, even among, you know, actual alcohol brands like Budweiser and Coors and everything else too. So it was the top selling. Of course, it had a lot to do with dry January, but it's interesting that it would sell out all the big brands. And to your point from before, a lot of the choices were, it's either all alcohol or just super sugary sodas, and then or a Red Bull. Like you had no early options. So
Yeah.
I like that. Even if someone who's still drinking, you might have a more like socially acceptable alternative where I can have that Heineken Zero and just taper down as opposed to rushing it before closure and then you know driving dangerously or something. So there, even for people who are still drinking, I like that there's kind of that added safety yet still social angle too,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
could slowly over time help uh, chip away at the paradigm. But obviously, it's not going to be certainly overnight. Uh,
Yeah.
it's good to have that socially acceptable option. So uh, let's see. So your target and the one you normally talk to, and with the gray area drinking are typically kind of a Gen X. From your research, have you seen that uh, you know Gen Z are drinking a little bit less now? But is that, do you think, because they might not have a mortgage or kids, or do you think that there's actually a difference in younger generations?
Yeah, I do think there's a difference, and I've done a lot of research into the younger generation, and they are drinking less across the board. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think number one, particularly here in Australia, like they're just so much more health conscious. Like I was laughing with my friend the other day because she's got two stepdaughters who are 18 and 20. And like at that age, I was spending all my money on alcohol, drugs, and fags. And these two girls spend all their money on going for brunch and physio appointments. We were just like, oh my God, it's so different. Like
Wow.
so different. I think that they are more health aware. They're more aware that what they do can be recorded. So, you know, back in my teens and 20s, there was no social media, there were no smartphones, thank goodness. But, you
Uh-huh.
know, now my son's 14 and a half, and a girl he's at a boys' school and there's a girls' school, and a girl in his year had got really drunk at a party and passed out and wet herself. And someone filmed this and it got passed around everybody. And you know, that's what people just are so terrified of, that no one wants to be in a state where they might lose track of what they're doing and then
Interesting.
someone records it. So there's definitely a fear around that. And then there's the money. Like, alcohol in Australia is freaking expensive. They have put the taxes up. And I just think that that generation, they can't afford to go out. So they drink before they go. But then
Uh-huh.
once they're out, they can't afford drinks.
Yeah, that's interesting that, there's so many, older generations would be kind of anti-social media, but then in this case it's possibly quite a
Yeah.
good thing for them, because
Yeah.
now you've got the social repercussions potentially if things do go excessive. So that's one good thing to say about Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and whatnot. So whereas like with you had that, the accountability with your daughter. Now, the younger generation, pre-kids and family, they're avoiding ridicule. And so it's an accountability, but in a different form. So that's an
Yeah.
interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, how about like, so when you do consulting, and are you traveling for it too, or it's such, a big market in Australia? Are you still staying local for the work that you're doing?
So all the work I do is online. So I've got clients in the US, Canada, the UK, Europe, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. So everything I do is online. Apart from when I do the corporate work where I do talks, then I fly to wherever I'm needed to go.
Okay, all right. So these clients who are all over the place, are they coming from the, UK, US, Australia, or is that it's not just, you know, these might be the more problematic areas, but your clients are coming from all different types of cultures and backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
would say that my market is midlife women.
Mhm.
So I predominantly work with women aged 40 to 65. And because I found that that's where the biggest problem drinking is. And I run programs for women to change their relationship with alcohol.
Fantastic, fantastic. And then so you were already doing consulting before the book came out, right?
Yeah.
And what prompted the book? Were you kind of requested, or was it kind of your own little idea just to get more clients, or like what? Tell me about that process, because that's probably, had you launched a book before? I mean, was this kind of something you were nervous about, and then in doing so, did that almost cause you to want to drink, or were you already totally done with it?
Yeah. So I stopped drinking after my break in 2017. I had gone back to drinking and thinking, oh, I've taken 3 months off. I'll I clearly don't have a problem because I've taken 3 months off. So now I'll just go back and I'll just be a normal drinker and someone that just has a glass of wine every now and then, and that'll be it. And that's not how it works. And so within a couple of weeks, I was back to drinking quite significantly. So I finally made the decision to stop drinking in 2019. So I've just passed 5 years. And I have always been a massive reader. It's been a lifelong dream to write a book. So I had retrained in 2020. My previous life, I was a corporate career coach and an executive recruiter. So I'd always been used to working one-on-one with people, to interviewing people, to asking, that had been my life for 20 odd years. And so, but I wanted to do something different. And after COVID hit, my business had gone on hold anyway because no firms were recruiting. Everyone was just at home, like desperate to
Yeah.
keep their job, let alone
Uh,
thinking about moving. So that was kind of the pivotal moment for me, where I decided to close down my recruitment career coaching business and to retrain as a health and well-being coach, and then as a grey area drinking coach. So I launched my business in January 21. So I've been coaching for 3.5 years and supporting women. I work with men as well, one-to-one, and then I work with women in programs. And in 2022, I was thinking, what what do I feel is missing in the book genre of people quitting alcohol? What's missing? And I could see that there were two types of books out there. So there were books that were autobiographies of people's stories of quitting
Hmm.
alcohol, and there were books on how to quit drinking. So there was those two types of books, both of which had, played a massive part in my journey, supported me. I'm a massive reader. But what I could see that there was no book, there were books about how to get sober, but there were no books about how to stay sober. So
Okay.
there were no books about, well, what do you actually need to add into your life so that you create a life where you don't want or need to drink anymore because you've done the work on yourself, you've identified what needs to be healed, you've added in what brings you joy, what fulfills you, what interests you. And so your life is rich and full, and you don't even think about drinking anymore. And that was the book that I wanted to write, because I could see that that's the missing piece, particularly for so many of the women that I work with, because they're often so busy because they're raising kids, they might have elderly parents, they're working full time, they're doing the lion's share of what needs to be done at home. So they have nothing for themselves in their life, and they feel overwhelmed, disillusioned, unfulfilled, like anxious,
Hmm.
exhausted. And so I wrote this book for her, for that woman who is just feeling all of those things, with every single step in the process that I have gone through, but also that I have coached thousands of women through, to what it takes to create a life where you don't want or need to drink. So I put together my book proposal and I sent it to two publishers. And I was lucky enough that I got a book deal straight away.
From the two? Oh, okay, that's great.
From
Oh,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
from one, yeah,
yeah,
but just from the two queries. So no, that's
yeah,
fantastic. Yeah,
yeah.
because you were already coaching and you had your experience, and so like you just combined those, and I imagine it felt uh fairly natural then, because that's your background. You didn't need to necessarily totally start 0 to 1 in a whole new
No.
field. So that's fantastic. And and sales are doing okay.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, great.
From
I
what,
saw it. I
like,
was on Amazon. I'll link to it in the post too, so we don't want to give away too much of, the huge points. But and how was it as far as writing? Did you have any help in editing? Was it just kind of like, here's my background, everything I've gone through, and then did it just flow, or like, having not been an author before, how was the process?
yeah, it was quick. So I got the book deal in April, and they wanted the book finished by the end of June.
Okay.
So it was a very intense, this time last year. I was kind of a bit, because I was also still coaching. I've
Hmm.
got two kids, like there was a lot going on. Um, but at the same time, like, everything was in my head. I knew it. What I
Yeah.
needed help with was how to structure, how to write a book. So I did work with a book coach, and she really helped me, because I had such a tight timeline,
Oh yeah.
to get the structure right of what needs, how to, the path, the process to follow in each chapter. But in my proposal, I'd done so much work. I had laid out exactly what each chapter would follow, what it would cover, some of the case studies I would include. I'd done 3 sample chapters as part of my book proposal. So when I had that tight deadline of 3 months, a lot of the work had been done. It was literally just setting time aside to actually write and get it down. And then my publishers edited it, and then the book came out in the February.
Nice. Now, how fulfilled do you feel now? Does this seem like something that you might have already been on the path for when you were younger too, like in retrospect? Because sometimes people, you go a long distance out of the way to come back a short distance correctly. Like, when you think about your background and your experiences, does this all kind of, I don't know, just make you light up? Like, what's your day to day as far as this? Is it one of those like, I'm glad I went through these type of things, or do you wish you hadn't? Uh, you know what I mean? Like, people who are
Yeah.
struggling right now, and kind of point them toward that light at the end of the tunnel, if you will.
Yeah, like it was such a natural process for me. And I think I always knew in my heart that one day I would write a book. Like, it was just one of those things that I knew. And if you found me as a little girl, I was in my room writing stories. That was kind
Uh-huh.
of, I just created these elaborate books, and I would staple all the pages together, and I would go and take them. Like, that was what I
Yeah.
did. And so for me, it felt like a very, very natural process that was what would happen. And now, like, it just lights me up every day. I get messages from people like I've never met that have picked up my book and they've read it and they've just said, wow, this has changed my life. I got a beautiful message yesterday from a lady who said, my son bought your book for his dad for Father's Day. And I was like, wow, that's
Oh, nice.
amazing. Because although the book is very much written from a woman's perspective, there is so much in there that men
Yeah,
can get from it. And I've had so many messages from men saying, this has just been brilliant. Thank you.
that's fantastic. Yeah, we're all connected. We're all people. We all have like,
Exactly,
similar stories
exactly,
too.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
who
And there's
else?
quite a bit in there about kind of the hormonal changes that women go through in menopause. But then I would also argue that men kind of need to know that anyway. So it's a great book for men to know and understand as well.
Oh, fantastic then. So what, just real quick, what kind of stories were you writing when you were younger? Were they kind of these like empowering, kind of uplifting, like happy ending kind of stories, where it's kind of similar to what you're doing now, or you're helping others, or what were they like?
Yeah, and they were always like, there was always a goodie, a baddie, and there was always some kind of big confrontation in the middle, and then everyone lived happily ever after. And so it was just
So
like,
now we've got our goodie, our internal selves, and we got to battle that external baddie, the marketing, the paradigm, what have you. And no, that's fantastic. And so you're basically, it's not just like, oh, I'm, X days sober. You're talking about a reframe necessarily, right? It's I want to feel that, because before I was, I might have been filling this gap with wine or what have you. We're filling it with other things that are more beneficial to us and society or family, right? So it's kind of filling that niche, and not thinking of necessarily, how many days sober am I? I'm kind of maybe a metamorphosis, if you will, right? I'm kind of shedding that skin. Would that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's so important that we consider that for all of us, life is a process and we don't need to stay the same. And I think that when we're drinking, we stay we stay the same. I didn't feel like my life moved forward in any way. Whereas in the removal of alcohol, it's like I've shed so many skins and I've been able to come back to my true authentic self. And
Hmm.
along the way, I have experienced lots of growth, lots of personal development, lots of new challenges, but I would never swap that for going back to drinking.
No, that's fantastic. And I wouldn't want to give away too much of your, what you do in your coaching or in the book, but just a couple more things before let you go about the rest of your day. I think sometimes, and I think we were kind of hitting at this before, uh, we might be drinking, and that's part of our identity. There might be a fear of dropping that because I don't know who that other person would be, right? So like if I identify as a drinker, or it's always been in my family or in my society, uh, how can you get past that fear of another self, basically, right? Because if my relationships are connected to this person, am I going to lose relationships? Or like there's always so many what ifs. Like how do you tackle the person who has the what if uh
Yeah.
milieu?
And I've written loads about this in the book, and there's a chapter on how your friendships change, there's a chapter on how your relationship might change. And I think that we as humans are evolved to grow and to change and go through seasons in our life. But we now live in a world where we're afraid of discomfort, we're afraid of change, we've got more anxiety, more of this going on in our lives. And so we don't embrace that. But then many of us live a life that just perpetuates that feeling where, we have too much processed food, we're drinking alcohol, we don't get enough sleep, we don't exercise enough. And so we our life becomes very small and it becomes very siloed of this is what I do. And with the removal of alcohol, I would say just be patient. It's not like it happens overnight and suddenly you've removed alcohol and you wake up as this different person. It's a gradual evolution. And some people might find that scary, and yeah, it is scary, but what if you go through your entire life without ever knowing who you really are at your core? like that's scary too.
Mhm.
And I don't think we can ever know who we are at our core if we're relying on a substance that changes our personality. Like so many people that I work with go, I didn't realize I'm actually an introvert. I thought I was this massive party animal, and that was just who I was when I drank.
Mhm.
But what about all these people that never get to know their true authentic self
Yeah.
because they're constantly creating this persona around alcohol that creates this entirely different identity that takes you away from self. And that's the beauty of this journey. It's not quick. It's I'm still learning, I'm still growing, I'm still evolving, and please may I still be doing that when I'm 90, because that
Mhm.
is the excitement and of life. Because the alternative is we stay the same and nothing changes, and then a
Yeah.
year goes by and 2 years go by and 5 years go by, and we just get more and more pissed off, resentful, tired, unfulfilled, and just go, is this it? Is this my life? And so it's like pick which path you would rather go down.
Exactly, because it makes sense for some to, pick that, that any port in a storm. But if we're using the ship analogy, or metaphor, if you will, like we're not meant to just stay in the harbor. So yeah, there might be some waves out there, but you're made for that, uh, basically. So no,
Yeah.
I'd love to keep this short and sweet, and I want to link to the book and as much of your content as possible, so people can find you. We'll do a whole big link dump and everything. But I appreciate your time immensely. Do you have any like final words for the person who might have just found you out of the blue?
Yeah, like head to my website, sarahrusbatch.com, look at the work that I do, reach out to me if you've got questions, get a copy of my book. I think even if you're curious and you haven't considered being on that alcohol-free journey before, I always say to people, see it as an experiment. Take 30 days off and just see it as a project you to take a bit of time to see, well, what changes in my life, even if I'm not drinking that much. You'd be surprised at how much alcohol is still impacting your sleep, your energy, your productivity, your motivation, your confidence, and what might change with taking that break.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much for
Thanks.
having me.